Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Anchor Conversations podcast. We took last week. We didn't have a podcast, and I apologize for that. That was a little bit of a miscommunication on what we were doing. So that's kind of that's not the norm. So if you tuned in last week and tried to figure it out, that was just a calendar snafu that was perpetuated by me. So anyway, here we are. We're back. The Anchor Conversations podcast. This podcast is really just trying to find a way to take what we learned on Sunday morning and bring it into our weekdays as we think about it. We want to be purposely biblical. It's one of our values. We want to take that the application or just even what we are series that we're in right now. We're in a one more becoming relentlessly outward series. We want to take that and we want to bring that kind of content to you on a weekday so that you can still mull it over and figure out how you can apply that. And so to that end, I'm here with Tyler Jenner. Tyler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, you're here every week.
That's true.
We kind of do this every week. We just switch.
Except for the weeks where we cross wires and
Yeah, like
we
last week.
miscommunicate with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is fine. I mean, this week it's going to be okay because it's the same text. So I feel like
That's true.
I feel like it's, we can just wrap this all up into one as we kind of go. But just real quick before we even get started on the podcast, just wanted to tell you if you have not heard, we're trying to get the word out. Tyler and Lindsay are going to be being sent out from us to go and kind of be long-term missionaries, I guess, at Sunshine Acres, which is a group home in Mesa. So no, they're not going far. The plan for now, I think we can still make it work. Tyler's going to still be on this podcast. We're going to do this together for this foreseeable future, unless at some point he just can't with his schedule. But we're gonna make it work. And which but the biggest change you're gonna see is we won't see Tyler and Lindsay on Sunday mornings for at least for now. And that's because they're going to be working. By full time, their meetings, they're going to move to Sunshine Acres. They have a house there. They're going to be on campus. It's a group home. And one of their work days is going to be a Sunday. So they're going to have to be there with the kids in their group. So that's kind of a change. But if you want to hear Tyler weekly, you just come back here because you're going to hear him every week. We're going to be talking about the sermon and continue to go forward. Is that fair? Anything else to add to that, Tyler?
Yeah, the other big change is going to be I won't have my podcast studio anymore, which I built this thing, just a few months ago, and already I'm going to be leaving it behind, which is kind of sad. I don't know what the background will be over there. It won't. Well, you know what? I'm going to put Kobe Bryant and the Lakers plushie behind me, wherever I'm at. So that's going to be part of it. But I got to figure that out. Yeah, so there might be some hiccups as we're trying to figure out days and times and how we're going to make this thing work over there. But we'll get it figured out once we get settled in and figure out new norms, and pretty much almost everything in our lives is changing. So
yeah. Tyler and Lindsay are gonna need some help. We actually have a needs sheet we're gonna try and communicate to everybody. So there's gonna be things on there. If you guys can, if you're listening to this and you want to participate in that, it's gonna be everything I think from babysitting occasionally for them so they can get a date nights to other things. There's other things on there too. That's the first one that came to mind. So, but anyway, we have a list, and we'll get that to you. Hopefully, as a church, we can support them that, and also just in prayer. So, we'll make sure we get that kind of get that accomplished, and we can go with you that way in terms of prayer. But I'm really glad that we get to continue to do this weekly. This will be a good touch point, and I think for those of you listening to this who like the podcast and who love Tyler, this is a good time to be able to continue to benefit from his wisdom as we go. So, also speaking of the mission series, we're on this series called One More, like I just said, becoming relentlessly outward. One of the things that's going to be helpful, I think, with Tyler and Lindsay being over at Sunshine Acres is that there might be opportunities for us to serve the kids at Sunshine Acres. It's a group home. I can't even describe this well, but it's a group home of kids who they're not orphans. Their kids are their parents are still around. It's just that their parents, for one reason or another, there could be any sorts of reasons. You can probably guess some of them, but just they can't take care of them for a season, or they're not allowed to, or something. There's something going on there where they need a place to be And so Sunshine Acres comes in and brings them into their community. And so Tyler and Lindsay are going to be serving there. But one of the ways that Tyler and I have been serving Sunshine Acres for a while now, every January, February, and into March, we've served them in terms of a duo, a flag football league called Duo, and it really is geared towards serving Sunshine Acres. It's bringing some kids from the community and their parents, many Christians actually, over to serve as football coaches and trying to integrate some of these kids that have had a life that's been just difficult and not, you know, not really been around maybe I don't know if I want to say this right, but maybe stable families or families that have, you know, two parents and something like that. But so we've been able to go over there and coach a lot of those kids at Sunshine Acres for the last 10 years. And that's an opportunity for you as a church family, maybe to even get your kids involved in that and coach. We'd love to see, you'll see Tyler and Lindsay there, the kids playing it. That's every January, February, and into March. And we'd love to have more of you a part of that. It's actually a really easy way to be involved in mission and think outside of yourself. So pray about that. If you have younger kids, I think it's kids from 5 to 18 can play in that, boys or girls. It's co-ed, and they don't have to ever have played football before. Most of the kids there have not. It's a way to teach them some life skills and other things, and plus get your kids involved with kind of a ministry organization and try and figure out what it looks like to serve. So if you're interested in that, you don't have to coach. You can go over there and hold some sticks. You can do some down markers. You can do lots of other things over there, but I'd love to see more of you out there, both your kids playing in it, but also just serving. It'd be great. There are referees out there that are in their 60s, some of them maybe even their 70s.
I think so.
Yeah, referees that are in their 20s. So I mean, all ages. So we'd love to get more of you out there to serve in Duo this year. We'll give more information as we come, but that's just one way I wanted to mention as we're thinking about the One More series, which leads us kind of into the podcast today. Tyler, your sermon was from, this is the second sermon in the series. We both preached from the same passage. I did more of a high level, just kind of helping us think about why one more. And your sermon this week was from the same passage, Colossians 2:13-15. Your big idea was the message of the gospel is an invitation to live. Talking about just, you know, stories. You mentioned as you started just the story of your own, I guess, meeting of the Lord, or the Lord meeting you through a guy you called Ned Flanders, which I loved. And you were mentioning, it's funny, like most of the church knew that reference, which is great. I love that. I love that we have some Simpsons fans here at the church. But I think there's people, you mentioned this, hey, if you want to hear more of my story, maybe talk about it in the podcast. And so someone asked, you know, thank you for writing your questions, by the way. Someone asked, hey, let's hear more about your story. So there's a specific question here, but is there anything else that you left out of that story that you kind of thought, yeah, I didn't get a chance to say this, but I wanted to just mention it in terms of how God met you through this guy that came into QT?
Yeah, I'll back up a little and kind of talk about how God met me prior to that season, to where I was even, you know, kind of aware of the Lord and maybe in some ways seeking, although I wasn't doing anything about the seeking, but was feeling. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home. So when I was in high school was really my first introduction to the gospel and to Christianity in large part. Other than my family had a really brief season at a Lutheran church, but I was too young to really remember much of that, other than playing with action figures under a pew. That's pretty much all I remember of that spot. And that the pastor had a parsonage. Parsonage is what it's called, right? When they have housing on campus. Yeah. He had a parsonage, and he had a bunch of ostriches, and so we'd go over and try not to get bit by the ostriches.
Who doesn't have ostriches?
Right. Seriously, yeah. I have a lot of ostriches. What's the plural of ostriches? Ostrigi?
Ostrich, ostriches, ostriches. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, so I really didn't have a whole lot of introduction to Christianity, but in high school, I went to Young Life, mainly because my brother went to Young Life, And he mainly went because there were cute girls at Young Life, and then he brought me. So we would go to Young Life, and I had some pretty cool experiences there. One of them was at a camp up in northern Arizona. It's called Lost Canyon. Our youth group has gone there a few times. But when I went there, it was really small. Actually, it was about 3 buildings that had been built, and a dorm for guys, a dorm for girls, and a cafeteria. And even like the sessions were in the cafeteria. But when I was up there, I was up there for a winter camp, and my dad had taken me right before I left to get a jacket because I didn't have a jacket. And so he took me to like a secondhand place to get a jacket. And really all we could afford was this really thin like pullover. And so it was like thinner than a shirt. And so I went to this camp in Williams, Arizona in, January or whatever it was, and basically a pullover, like long sleeve shirt. And the speaker on that Friday night had talked about sin and our need for forgiveness. And then afterwards, he said, "Hey, I want you guys all to go out in kind of in the dark and just have some time with the Lord, just deal with God," which was really cool, except for it was probably in the 20s. It was snowing. It was really cold. And so I went out into this, into the field. And I was trying to pray based on, what this guy had said about Jesus and forgiveness and all this stuff. But I was shivering so badly that I couldn't pray. I couldn't think. I was just freezing. And I do remember I had one prayer in which I said, all right, if there's a God, if you hear me and you are real, I'm out here to pray to you like this guy said, but I can't stop shivering. If you're real, I need you to warm me up. And in that moment, I felt a warming sensation come over my body, and I stopped shivering. And I was kind of standing out in this field, in really cold weather, and I was fine. I wasn't cold anymore. So that was my sophomore year of high school. And I kind of walked away from that camp going, okay, God's real. Like, I can't deny that. But I wasn't a follower of Jesus. They gave me like a New Testament and Psalms, type of Bible setup to take away with me. And just based on that experience, I was like, okay, I want to get to know what this Bible says. And so I would read it. Actually, I would read it every night because they had like you read through this thing in like 100 days or a year or whatever it was. They had like a checklist. I'm a checklist guy. So I was like, all right, I'm going to read this thing every night. I'm going to do my checklist. But I would hide the Bible in my closet because I didn't want my brothers to know, because they would have made fun of me, or whatever. I don't know what they would have thought of me, but I was afraid of my brothers knowing. So here I am, like hiding this Bible, reading it every night. And I think, I walked away from that, still not following the Lord, still not trusting him, but going, okay, there is a God. This Jesus character is very appealing. There's something about him that's drawing me in. But also, I was already in high school. I was living with my girlfriend. I was partying with my friends. I was kind of doing my own thing. I didn't want to stop doing that either. So I was kind of going my own way at the same time. And, there was just a lot of conviction surrounding that. So, graduate high school, start working overnights in some really terrible areas of the valley at a gas station. You just see a lot of things that you don't think you're going to see. And even me, I didn't grow up in a great area. I grew up in city housing. Still, like the worst of the worst kind of comes out at 1:30 a.m. at a gas station. Just trust me on that. So it was pretty heavy. I was in a pretty ugly spot, I think, just given my own sin and the the world around me that I was dealing with. And that's when Ned Flanders popped into my life. and the rest of the story I shared on Sunday.
Yeah, it's I think that if we all think about our own testimonies, I wonder if you kind of are gonna you, in a similar way that Tyler just did, look back and maybe see God preparing your heart to hear at the right time. Even you being at up in Williams, just God preparing your heart to have a soil that is ready to hear the gospel when it's brought to you, or to respond when someone says, "Come to church with me." You go, "Okay." God just, I think the Lord's at work doing those things. We don't even see it, and we may not know it until afterwards. Maybe some of you haven't even thought about it until now. Just thought like, well, I wonder how the Lord was preparing my heart to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
So much, I think in this series, we're going to be talking a lot about, and by the way, just as a side note, um, Peter and I are actually going to start a second podcast that's going to be maybe every other week. We're just going to call it One More Becoming Relentlessly Outward. Peter was at AIA, Athletes in Action, for 15 years. And so I wondered if it would be helpful for him to just even share some tools for us as we've kind of thought through. Last week we had, or 2 weeks ago, we had the on the screen, you guys answered a lot of questions. We kind of have some of those outputs, which we'll talk about. But a lot of it was just like, I don't know how. I'm not really sure what to say, And so like we want to start something where we can actually address some of those things pretty specifically. And one of them is what Tyler just did. I just think talking about your testimony and knowing it is so important because, I think if Tyler, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but you sharing that story with somebody that doesn't believe in Jesus, they may not automatically go, "Oh, well, I'm going to believe in Jesus now." But what they will do is say, "Wow, you came from a different spot, and it sounds like this God that you believe in met you. And man, like, look where you are now." And you can just say, "I don't know the answer to lots of questions, but I do know that the Lord changed my life."
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for us. So look for that this Monday morning. You're going to see that. We'll let you know how to find it, but that podcast is gonna be coming out on Monday morning, this Monday. So watch for that. But Tyler, I appreciate you sharing your testimony.
Yeah, let me throw one more thing out there because
Yeah.
you had mentioned, yeah, just the Lord preparing you to hear the gospel, and that's one of the things that I think there's power in the testimony, both in for the non-Christian, but also for each other to remember. I think about this in my story in particular. There were some really small and insignificant things that that God used to pull me in, that a lot of us, as we think about sharing the gospel, we would think isn't even worth our time, or it has no impact. But it was as simple as Brother Len coming in and saying praise Jesus over and over again. Like it was as simple as that. And before that, in Young Life, I had a Young Life leader who was a big part of my story too, where I had told him somewhere around at another camp, at a summer camp, I think after the one from the story I just shared, where they did a say so, and where you raise your hand if you accepted Jesus, and or if you're a Christian or whatever. And I had raised my hand, and so afterwards he followed up with me, and he said, "Hey, I didn't know that you accepted Jesus." And just like in my ignorance and probably like the peer pressure of it all, I was like, "Oh yeah, I accepted Jesus a long time ago." And he was like, "Really? You're a Christian?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been a Christian." He goes, "Huh." And he goes, "What does that mean for you?" And I said, "I don't know. I mean, I guess like I read the Bible sometimes." And this was the question that stuck with me. That again, this is as simple as your one more kind of conversations need to be sometimes. He said, "Really? Is that all that being a Christian is about? Is that all there is to the Christian life?" And I went, "Yeah." And he just said, "Okay." And that was the conversation. And that question was the question that I was still wrestling with, a few years later as I'm working at Quick Trip going, man, is there more to this Christian thing? Is there more to this God? Like, which is why I was having a feeling of like, I need to go to church, which is why I dreamed about going to church. It's like all those just very little things that, probably felt insignificant for certain people. We just don't know the impact of what God's doing in someone's life when we're just authentic and real, and like, yeah, no, maybe there's more to Jesus than you think.
Yeah.
You never know what just a statement
You
like
don't.
that could have,
Yeah. You don't. And I wonder if some of you are listening to this right now and you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish my testimony was like that. Because maybe you grew up in a Christian home and you kind of feel like I've heard people say this before. My testimony is boring. Tyler's testimony is about like me getting warmed up in the middle of a field in Williams and then Ned Flanders coming up and saying praise Jesus and he goes to church and whatever. And you're like, man, I wish that I had a testimony like that because if I were to tell people my testimony, it'd be, well, I grew up in church. This is my testimony, by the way. I grew up in church. My grandma, I heard the gospel when I was little, when I was 7 or 8 or something. I don't know. My grandma said, "Hey, would you ever want to pray and ask Jesus to be your savior?" I said, "Sure." And I prayed, and I think the Lord saved me like when I was little. And so my testimony is really boring, quote unquote. But I also think that there's no testimony that's boring. Like I think if we really understand, and we'll get into this in the podcast, both this one as we go through this series and also the one more podcast that Peter and I are going to do. Anytime God takes a dead heart, getting into the crux of your sermon here, Tyler, a dead heart and moves it from death to life. Anytime God does that, it doesn't matter if it's at 6 years old or if it's at 19 or 20 years old. Tyler, I think you were like 20 or 19 or something like that when that happened.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I was 19.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or when you're 45 and God takes you and moves you from one to the other. It doesn't matter when. Anytime that happens, it's a miracle. And it's actually a move of the Spirit, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in sharing it. I think that that's an important aspect to as we think about it. And if you have a quote unquote boring testimony like mine would be, I can point to that, but then I can point to also years later watching God do very specific things in my life to move me from immature Christian to mature Christian, which is also part of my testimony. It's my testimony of discipleship and growth. And so I just think we want to be thinking through those things a little bit. If you think you have a boring testimony, theologically, biblically, you do not. You were dead in your sins. I mean, this whole passage, and you were dead in the trespasses of your sins. God made you alive with him by nailing the certificate of debt with all of its demands to the cross. He did that for you. And we don't want to diminish that. So I would just encourage you and say, you don't have a boring testimony. You have a great testimony. God did a work in your life. Also, if you have children, my guess is your prayers for them is that you want them to also have a boring testimony. So it's an evidence of God's grace that he saved you from lots of things that he could have otherwise allowed you to go through. He didn't. I oftentimes think about this too. Jacob in the Old Testament had a testimony of running from the Lord, kind of a little bit of a shady character, stole a birthright. He had the weird thing that happened with with Rachel and Leah, and it was kind of strange. 7 years with trying to win their favor, and then he kind of he essentially stole his father-in-law's sheep and goats, and there was a lot of stuff he did there. He ran from his brother, like all that kind of stuff. And he might look at it and then remember the story. He woke up in a dream and there was a ladder between heaven and earth, and it was angels, and then the Lord himself, he wrestled the Lord, and he wouldn't let the Lord go, and he finally got an injury. Like the Lord essentially put his hip out of his socket, and he was never the same. He walked with a limp, left for the rest of his life. So that's a testimony that you can go, man, that's great. Well, then you also can go to the Old Testament and look at Samuel, who was dedicated to the Lord in the temple when he was circumcised, and raised, but then at a certain age, like, I don't know, young, like I think before 10 or something, he was given to the temple as a dedication to the Lord. And that's where he was. He grew up in the temple. He grew up hearing the voice of the Lord. He did not have a Jacob experience. And it doesn't matter, because we look at both of those guys and we're like, they're both heroes of the faith. And I just think it's important for us to get that. So I just encourage you with your testimony. Tyler, one more question on your testimony that we got texted in. What was the moment that you feel like God, they put it in quotes, God experience, but that God just really changed your heart, moved you from death to life? And then also, they were just curious what happened after your first service at the church that you went to, where what was the name? Brother
Len.
What,
Yeah.
he wasn't there for that first service? You were there, and he was like, "Oh man, he didn't show up today." What happened after that? And when did the Lord actually, you feel like he actually changed you?
Yeah, I'll answer the first part of it or the second part of it first because they're related. But really, what happened that day was at that church there was a group of and again, as I even share this part of the story, I would encourage you to think about how much it matters your presence on a Sunday and what you do on a Sunday. That Sunday morning, there was a group of guys that were about my age, and they saw me and they saw that I stood out, and they came over and they were like, "Hey, like good to meet you. What's your name?" And they introduced themselves and they started asking me questions and getting to know me, and then they said, "Hey, we're gonna go grab lunch afterwards. Can you come with us?" And I said, "Sure." And those guys became some of my closest friends for the next couple of years. Actually, they wrapped around me a sense of community like you couldn't believe. I've actually never experienced something like it since. um it was a unique time. We were all college age, we were all single, and just had a lot of time to kill, and so we spent a ton of time together, and most of that time was talking about the Bible, and they just shared Jesus with me over and over and over. And I'm sure it was awkward for him in the beginning because I was such a weird person. It just so like I just think back on some of the weird stuff that I was into, and they weren't judgmental. They were just like, "Cool, man." And they connected with me over different things. Like, "Oh, you like heavy metal music? Cool. So do I. It's Christian music. Let me show it to you." So we all got into really, into Christian heavy metal music, and I went to concerts and got punched in the face in mosh pits and things like that, and it was great. Um, but they wrapped me in community. So those guys really brought me in, and I would say I don't know how long it was, but a few months into attending that church and just hearing the gospel, theologically now I would probably disagree with a lot of the things that were preached at that church, but they preached Jesus. Secondarily, I would disagree with things, but they preached the gospel week in and week out faithfully. Outreach was in the name of the church, so they were all about outreach and sharing the gospel. And so probably a few months in, it just kind of all clicked for me where I was like, "Oh, Jesus is everything. Like my whole life needs to be given over. This isn't just like an addition to my life. This isn't just like, oh yeah, I've been fine and now I'm going to have like a genie in my pocket." Like, no, my whole life is his and it's time to give it to him. And so, um, there was a moment of that during an altar call, at some point, and yeah, I just surrendered. I believed, I trusted, and then I walked with that community for a couple of years, just like seriously wrapped in community. So yeah, I mean, you think about like a Sunday morning and you're welcome to someone. You could literally be giving them a whole new friend group that otherwise they wouldn't be hearing the gospel. And that was my life. Like all my friends were tied to my previous life. And I kind of walked away from it all when I accepted Jesus. So if not for a community to receive me, I don't know like how that would have happened or how long that would have taken or whatever. But yeah, so that was kind of the rest of the story there.
Yeah, that's good. That is a good reminder. I think if we're gonna be genuinely outward, one of those things is to be also committed to be inward. Um, and that means, when we've talked about this in the past, but being a church body, like we've had a lot of visitors come to the church and love the welcome. That only happens if you're there. I mean, I know the summers are weird, but I mean, there were some Sundays in the summer where there was like 40 people in there. Normally we have 90, 50 people are gone. So it's hard to be welcoming when it's half the people are gone. I understand it's not I mean, I know we get vacations and it's 115 degrees outside. I get that. You know, but I think that there is something to be said about the church community being present if we're going to be outward. That's important. That just is. It's just an important discipline to do not forsake the gathering. Um, don't forsake the gathering. And you can, I mean, you don't want to be legalistic. We'll never do that. But how many times do you miss before you forsake the gathering? I don't know. But we have to be cognizant of that, especially if we're going to be an outward church. So, um, maybe just we have a few minutes left, Tyler. I thought, from the sermon itself, we've kind of hit on some of these things. Let me just go to the live it out point here. You had two of them. Accept Jesus' invitation to experience the life that is truly life. So really, this sermon, everybody, in this series is meant to be like, what is the gospel? And Tyler, you walked through this sentence. It says, the gospel is, in Jesus, God gives true life by forgiving sins, paying debts, and conquering evil. So the gospel really is a rescue. It's a God acting upon us, giving us true life from death by forgiving our sins, meaning wiping our sins away, but not leaving us at a zero balance. If we're talking about like a bank account, he doesn't just say, hey, I'm going to remove all of your sins. He's going to say, I'm also going to pay all of those debts. And so you have a positive sum in your bank account. You're not negative. You don't have to declare bankruptcy. You're good. Like, we got all of it taken care of. And he also conquers evil that is against us. So you said, accept Jesus' invitation to experience the life that is truly life. And also, which is the question I want to just hit you with it for a second, but invite others into the life that they were made for. Invite others into the life that they were made for. I just wonder if there's like, for those of us that are out here that just find it difficult to do that, inviting others into the life that they were made for, just that simple invitation. We started off the series with talking about empty chairs. There's empty seats around our table. There's empty seats around our kitchen table. When we go out to lunch at Panera or wherever, like, there's empty seats there. There's empty seats on Sunday mornings. Like, what does it look like to invite others into that? Even just something as basic as that. Like, what does it look like to just be an inviter?
Yeah, I think it probably looks different for a lot of different people. We were talking about my man Neil, who's just like killing it at the gym, inviting people in.
I know. I love it. Hey, just
Which is amazing.
Can I tell this story really quick? Hope
Sure.
Neil, I hope you're
Yeah.
okay with this. I love this so much. On Sunday morning, I walked up to Neil. If you don't know Neil and Karen, you should get to know them. They're great. But Neil, he said, "Hey, here's my card." He had his little one more card, and he had a name filled out on it, and he handed it to me. And I said, "Oh, is this your one? This is your one more that you're praying for?" And he just pointed, because the one more that he started to pray for on Sunday was at church on Sunday, because he just went for it. And I honestly, Neil, like, I love that. I want to have more of those testimonies, everybody, of just that you're doing it. So anyway, that's what you're talking about, Tyler. I just wanted to, Neil, thank you for doing that. And tell us your stories, guys. We want to celebrate your one more stories like that.
Yeah, which is great. And some of us are gifted for that sort of thing. And some of us, I think I'm more of a long haul inviter where, I want to walk, with people for a long time and try and be a faithful witness over time, probably because my own trepidation to just be like, hey, come to church with me. So that's probably, a weakness that I have. But, I think that in both of those, what it means is making the space to do that and resolving to do it and making sure that anything that we value we'll make time for and we'll initiate, right? So if we really value being outward, I would just look and say, okay, what has God called me to in regards to that? Has he called me to be who is my one? Is it my neighbor? Okay, cool. Am I making time to have my neighbor over? Or is my life just so busy that I can't even squeeze my neighbor in? You kind of got a purpose to do it ahead of time. If you are more of like a spontaneous, go for it type of person, like maybe Neil is, all right, I'm going to the gym today. I'm going to see so-and-so. I'm going to make sure I go over to them and I strike up a conversation with them so that I can have this conversation. But you've got a purpose to do that. And then you've got to go do it. And what I tried to do on Sunday was to say, like, we should be really motivated to do this because this is the life that everyone we're thinking about was made for. They were made by the God of life to live. And we got to believe that. And then we got a purpose to go and figure out whatever that looks like for you. Again, for me, it is usually more long haul. It is more, I'm going to, make a friendship with someone. I'm going to try and, connect with them on some certain things. And then over time, hopefully have those conversations just where the Lord leads or whatever. If you are more of a, like, I'm just going to walk up and share it, then do that. But we've got to be available. We've got to be there to do that. So, I don't know. I guess it probably looks different for everyone. I know that for me, I really try hard as I think about my workplace to be a witness to people so that when I try and share the gospel, I have some credibility. I'm not just like, hey, oh yeah, by the way, like I spend my Sundays at a church. It's more like, people coming to me going, okay, how do you think about this issue? Because there's something different about you. And, that's when I get to have the conversation of like, yeah, here's what's different about me. Here's my values. And it starts with, image of God. It starts with the goodness of God. It starts with Jesus and his work and getting to have those conversations. But there's a groundwork that's laid beforehand for that. So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling. I think it's different for everyone, but I guess the upshot is it's purposeful. It's purposeful. We're thinking through it. We're making the time for it. We're doing it. And once we make the time, it's easier to actually walk into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's always a spot. And I think one of the things that Neil seems to be good at, I mean, as I was talking about how that all went about, I think that there's always a faith moment where it's like, all right, I'm just going to make it, I don't want this to be awkward, but I'm just going to say, hey, would you come over to our house? Would you come over to church? Can I tell you about Jesus? Even just, I'm assuming your brother Len intentionally was using us, praise Jesus regularly. And that could have been awkward too. I mean, but he just was like, I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm just going to bring people into my world. Like, this is my world. My world is that I'm always looking at the Lord and being grateful for him. I'll bring Tyler into that world by just telling him praise Jesus all the time. So I think
that's a great way to put it. This is already my world.
Yeah, this is my world. I'm just going to invite you to join in it. I'm not going to change. This is who I am. On that note, I would say, look for the One More podcast. I will probably put out a way to sign up for it at the end of this week. So just take a look for it. We'll put it on our social media. It's going to come out on Monday morning. We're going to talk very specifically about questions like this, like, okay, testimonies, how to think through it, how to have boldness. Why is it hard? What are some challenges? Even some practicals. We're going to really try and give you lots of helps and tangible things so that you can take these steps of faithfulness in terms of sharing the gospel. But Tyler, good to hear your story, man. Looking forward to sharing more stories. Everybody, if you have stories, please let us know so we can share them. We'd love to just celebrate these stories with everybody. And we're looking forward to this week as we talk about how Jesus thought about the gospel. How do you think about the mission? We're going to talk about that on Sunday morning, and looking forward to seeing everybody there.
All right. See y'all Sunday.
Thanks, everyone.